I built my entire career on the ability to predict disaster before it strikes. I manage billion-dollar crises for Fortune 500 companies, and I have never lost a fight. But the biggest threat to my empire was not in the boardroom. It was sleeping in my bed. My wife thought she planned the perfect secret getaway with her lover. She did not know that I had reserved the table right next to theirs, and I brought the one person she never expected to see. My name is Ethan, and for 44 years, I operated under the assumption that hard work and loyalty were the currencies of a good life. I am a senior partner at a top-tier crisis management firm in downtown Chicago. My job is simple yet brutal. When powerful people make mistakes, I am the one they call to clean up the mess. I view the world through a lens of risk assessment and liability. I thought my home was the one place where I did not need to watch my back. I was wrong. We live in a sprawling modern estate in Lake Forest, a place that screams success. My wife, Vanessa, was the envy of every woman at the country club. She is the director of public relations for a massive tech conglomerate. She is poised, articulate, and stunningly beautiful. We met at Northwestern University 2 decades ago. We were two hungry sharks circling the same tank, and we decided it was better to hunt together than to eat each other. We have 3 children, and from the outside, we look like the American dream personified. But dreams have a nasty habit of turning into nightmares when you wake up. The collapse of my reality began on a Tuesday night. I had just closed a settlement involving a pharmaceutical giant, a deal worth $60 million. I came home expecting a quiet celebration. The house was dark. The only light came from the kitchen island, where Vanessa's tablet sat charging. This was not unusual, as she often worked late. What was unusual was the notification that flashed across the screen just as I poured myself a glass of scotch. It was not a work email. It was a transaction alert from a private banking app that we did not share. I am not a jealous man, but I am a man who notices discrepancies. In my line of work, a discrepancy is a smoking gun. I walked over to the tablet. The passcode was our anniversary, simple and lazy. I unlocked it. The app was open. I saw a transfer of $10,000 to an account labeled merely with the initials CF underneath. The financial app was a secure messaging platform, one that deletes chats automatically unless saved. Vanessa had saved them. I stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, the scotch turning warm in my hand, and I read 6 months of betrayal. The man was Caleb Foster. I knew the name immediately. Caleb was not just some random trainer or co-worker. He was a high-profile venture capitalist, a man I had shaken hands with at charity galas, a man who had smiled at me while plotting to steal my life. The messages were graphic, detailing hotel stays at the peninsula and weekend trips to Aspen that she had disguised as business conferences. But then came the first twist that made my blood run cold. As I scrolled back through the months, I realized this was not just about sex. It was about strategy. Vanessa was feeding him information. She was giving Caleb insider details about my firm's clients, sensitive data that he was using to short stocks and manipulate market positions. She was not just cheating on our marriage. She was committing corporate espionage. She was risking my license, my reputation, and my freedom to impress a man who treated life like a game. Most men would have stormed upstairs, woken her up, and started a screaming match. I am not most men. I swallowed the rage until it settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I took my phone and photographed every single message, every bank transfer, and every trade secret she had leaked. I needed evidence that would stand up not just in divorce court, but potentially in federal court. I needed to be bulletproof. I placed the tablet back exactly as I found it. I went upstairs, undressed in the dark, and lay down next to the woman who was systematically dismantling my life. She shifted in her sleep, reaching out a hand to touch my arm. I did not flinch. I lay there staring at the ceiling, formulating a plan. In my head, I was already moving assets, contacting forensic accountants, and drafting legal motions. I fell asleep with the calm resolve of a soldier the night before an invasion. The next morning, the game began. Vanessa chirped happily about a mandatory work retreat coming up this Friday. She claimed she would be gone all weekend for a crisis summit in downtown Chicago. I watched her apply her makeup in the mirror, marveling at how easily the lies rolled off her tongue. I told her that was a shame because I was planning to take the kids to the lake house. She kissed me on the cheek, smelling of the expensive perfume I had bought her for Christmas, and walked out the door. As soon as her Mercedes left the driveway, I made a call. I did not call a lawyer yet. I called a private investigator who works exclusively for my firm, a man named Marcus who could find a needle in a haystack in the dark. I gave him Caleb Foster's name. I told Marcus I needed everything. I needed to know where they were going on Friday, but more importantly, I needed to know about Caleb's wife. Marcus called me back 3 hours later. The information he provided changed the entire landscape of my revenge. Caleb was married to Julianne Foster, the daughter of a real estate tycoon who essentially owned half the commercial property in the Loop. Julianne controlled the money in that marriage. Caleb was playing with fire, and he had no idea he was holding a match. Then came the second twist. Marcus informed me that Caleb had booked the chef's table at Alinea for Friday night. Alinea is one of the most exclusive restaurants in the world. Getting a reservation there takes months. Caleb had pulled strings. But Marcus found something else. The reservation was for 4 people. Caleb and Vanessa were not just going on a date. They were meeting with a shady offshore developer to finalize a deal using the stolen data Vanessa had provided. They were going to celebrate selling me out over $1,000 dinner. I realized then that simple exposure was not enough. I needed to destroy the deal, the affair, and their reputations in one surgical strike. I told Marcus to work his magic. I needed a reservation at Alinea for Friday night, specifically the table adjacent to theirs. Marcus told me it was impossible. I told him to buy the reservation from someone else if he had to. I told him money was no object. I would pay $10,000 for a seat at that show. Once the table was secured, I had one more call to make. I looked up Julianne Foster's number. She ran a prestigious art gallery in the River North District. I decided against a phone call. This required a personal touch. I left my office early, telling my secretary I had a family emergency. In a way, I did. I walked into the gallery just as they were closing. Julianne was there, reviewing a sculpture installation. She was elegant, sharp, and carried herself with an air of formidable intelligence. I approached her and introduced myself. She recognized my name immediately, likely from the business pages. I told her that I had a sensitive matter to discuss regarding her husband and my wife. She tried to dismiss me, assuming it was a solicitation for a donation. I stopped her and said that her husband was planning a very expensive dinner on Friday, and I thought she might want to see what her money was buying. The color drained from her face, but she did not crumble. She asked me what I knew. I showed her one single photo on my phone. It was a screenshot of Caleb bragging to Vanessa about how he was playing Julianne for a fool while spending her inheritance. Julianne looked at the image for a long time. When she looked back at me, her eyes were hard as diamonds. She asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I had a table reserved next to theirs for Friday night. I told her I did not want to cause a scene. I wanted to cause an apocalypse. I asked her to join me for dinner. I promised her the best meal of her life and the satisfaction of watching her husband's world burn while he was still chewing his appetizer. She didn't hesitate. She extended her hand and shook mine with a grip that told me Caleb Foster was already a dead man walking. Friday arrived with a heavy, gray sky over Chicago. Vanessa packed her overnight bag with an excitement she could barely contain. She kissed the kids goodbye, told me she would call when she got to the hotel, and drove off toward the city. I waited 10 minutes, then put on my best charcoal suit. I adjusted my tie in the mirror. I looked like a man going to work. Tonight, my work was justice. I got into my car and headed toward the city, ready to meet my new partner in crime. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and none of them knew that the director had rewritten the final act. I arrived at Julianne's penthouse in the Gold Coast district precisely at 7 o'clock. She emerged from the lobby wearing a dress that was less of an outfit and more of a weapon. It was a sleek, midnight blue sheath that cost more than my first car, radiating a kind of cold, armored elegance. We did not exchange pleasantries about the weather or the traffic. We simply nodded at one another, two generals acknowledging the start of a war. As she slid into the passenger seat of my sedan, I handed her a thick manila envelope containing the forensic analysis of the insider trading. She took it without a word, her eyes scanning the summary page with terrifying speed. She looked up at me and offered a tight, grim smile that promised total devastation. The drive to Alinea was silent, filled only with the hum of the engine and the collective anticipation of the carnage we were about to unleash. Valet took the car, and we walked toward the entrance of the restaurant, a place known for its theatricality and exclusivity. Tonight, we were the headliners of an unscripted drama. The maitre d' greeted us with professional hush, leading us through the minimalist, dimly lit corridor that opened into the main dining room. I spotted them immediately. They were seated at a prime corner table, bathed in soft light, laughing over glasses of vintage champagne. Vanessa looked radiant, a fact that stung more than I cared to admit. She was wearing the red dress I had bought her for her birthday, the one she said was too flashy for our usual dinners. Across from her sat Caleb Foster, looking every bit the arrogant venture capitalist, leaning in close to whisper something that made my wife giggle like a schoolgirl. But they were not alone. A third man sat with them, a heavy-set figure with nervous eyes and an ill-fitting suit. I recognized him instantly. It was Arthur Sterling, a mid-level corporate fixer known for facilitating gray market data transfers. This confirmed Marcus's intel. They were selling the data tonight. This was where the first twist of the evening came into play. Arthur Sterling knew me. 2 years ago, I had represented a client who had crushed Sterling's previous employer in a hostile takeover. Sterling knew that wherever I appeared, federal subpoenas usually followed. As Julianne and I approached our table, which was painfully close to theirs, Sterling looked up. His eyes locked with mine, and the color drained from his face instantly. He did not wait for an introduction. He stood up abruptly, knocking his napkin to the floor, and muttered something unintelligible to Caleb. Before Vanessa could even ask what was wrong, Sterling was speed-walking toward the exit, leaving the two lovers confused and alone with their stolen secrets. Vanessa watched him go, bewildered, and then turned her head to see what had spooked him. That was the moment she saw me. The transformation was instantaneous. Her smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked from me to Julianne, and I could see the gears in her mind grinding to a halt. Caleb turned to follow her gaze, and his expression shifted from confusion to a dawn of panicked recognition. He knew Julianne was supposed to be at a charity auction, and he knew I was supposed to be at the lake house. The reality of their situation crashed down on them like a falling safe. I pulled out a chair for Julianne, and we sat down at the table directly adjacent to theirs. The proximity was suffocating. We were close enough to touch them. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply signaled the sommelier and ordered a bottle of wine that cost $2,000. The silence from their table was deafening. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension, the way the air seemed to vibrate with unsaid accusations. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, to spin some desperate lie about a coincidental meeting, but I raised a hand to stop her. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a single blue folder. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth between our tables. I did not need to shout to be heard. I spoke in a low, even tone, explaining that the folder contained time-stamped logs of every file she had stolen from my secure server. But that was not the worst part. I revealed that my forensic team had found a hidden subdirectory on Vanessa's laptop. They had been planning to frame me. The plan was to leak the data and then anonymously tip off the Securities and Exchange Commission that I was the source, using my login credentials to cover their tracks. They were not just stealing from me. They were planning to send me to federal prison to cover their escape. Vanessa flinched as if I had struck her. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and aged. She realized that I knew everything, not just the affair, but the conspiracy. Caleb tried to bluster, puffing out his chest and starting to say something about privacy and harassment. That was when Julianne made her move. She did not look at Vanessa. She kept her eyes locked on her husband. She picked up her phone and placed it on the table, speakerphone on, but low volume. On the line was the chief financial officer of her father's holding company. Julianne spoke calmly, instructing him to execute immediate liquidity freezes on all joint accounts and to revoke the authorized user status on the corporate black cards Caleb carried. She listed the account numbers from memory, her voice devoid of emotion. Caleb frantically reached for his wallet, pulling out his phone to check his banking app. I watched as the notifications flooded his screen. Account suspended, card declined, transfer reversed. Then came the second twist, the one that broke Caleb completely. Julianne informed him that the gallery, the penthouse, and the cars were all held in a trust controlled by her family. He owned nothing, but she wasn't finished. She revealed that she had already forwarded the evidence of his insider trading, using the data Vanessa stole, to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division regarding a previous deal he had closed last month. She told him that agents were likely already at his office seizing his servers. She hadn't just cut off his money. She had served him up to the government on a silver platter. Caleb looked at his phone, then at Julianne, and finally at the exit, looking like a trapped animal. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that his life as a free man was measured in hours. Vanessa began to weep silently, reaching out a hand toward me, perhaps hoping for some shred of mercy or a chance to explain. I looked at her hand, the hand that wore my wedding ring, and felt absolutely nothing. I turned my attention to the waiter who had arrived with our wine. I asked the waiter to please inform the gentleman at the next table that his reservation had been canceled due to an invalid credit card. The waiter, sensing the shift in power and likely having seen the decline transaction alert on his system already, nodded discreetly. He turned to Caleb and politely asked them to vacate the table as the payment method on file was no longer active. The humiliation was absolute. Caleb stood up, his legs shaking, and practically ran toward the door without waiting for Vanessa. My wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, stood up slowly, wiping her eyes, casting one last desperate look at me. I raised my glass in a mock toast and turned away. We watched them leave, a pathetic procession of two ruined people walking out into the cold Chicago night. The dining room settled back into its hushed rhythm, though whispered conversations rippled through the room. Julianne took a sip of her wine, her hand perfectly steady. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of grief and dark satisfaction. We had fired the first shots, and they had been direct hits. But as I sat there, savoring the victory, I knew this was only the beginning. The legal war was just starting, and Vanessa was not the type to go down without trying to drag me with her. I had won the battle at Alinea, but the war for my children and my legacy was about to get much, much uglier. The drive back to Lake Forest was a blur of adrenaline and cold calculation. I had just detonated a nuclear device in the center of my marriage, but the fallout was only beginning. I knew Vanessa better than anyone. She was a cornered animal now, and her instinct would be to strike first and strike hard. I arrived at our estate just before midnight. The house stood silent and imposing in the darkness, a fortress I was now tasked with defending. I did not go to sleep. I went straight to my home office and initiated the lockdown protocols I usually reserve for high-risk corporate clients. I changed the digital access codes to the house, locked down the Wi-Fi network to prevent remote wiping of devices, and moved the physical hard drives containing the evidence into a biometric safe. I checked on the children. Mia, 17 and far too perceptive for her own good, was awake. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light. She looked up at me with eyes that mirrored my own, suspicious and tired. She did not ask where I had been. She simply watched me, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure of our home. I squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise that I would handle whatever was coming, and went to the master bedroom to wait. I packed Vanessa's essential belongings into 3 suitcases. It was a surgical act, removing her presence from the shared space before she could even return to claim it. Vanessa arrived at 2 in the morning. I heard the Mercedes screech into the driveway, followed by the frantic clicking of her key fob against the smart lock. The code no longer worked. I watched the security feed as she pounded on the door, her composure from the restaurant completely shattered. I opened the door, not to let her in, but to hand her the suitcases. She did not scream. She stared at me with a look of pure, venomous hatred. She tried to push past me, claiming she had a right to see her children, a right to her home. I stood firm in the doorway, blocking her path with my body. I informed her that due to the criminal nature of her activities, specifically the theft of proprietary client data from a home network, her presence constituted a security threat. I handed her a temporary restraining order. I had called in a favor from a federal judge I had known for 15 years, waking him up at midnight to get the emergency signature based on the evidence of corporate espionage I had emailed him. Vanessa read the paper under the porch light, her hands trembling. She realized then that I wasn't treating this as a marital dispute. I was treating it as a hostile corporate termination. She threw the papers at my chest and hissed that this wasn't over. She told me she would burn my reputation to the ground. She threatened to tell the world that I was the abusive one, that I had forced her into the affair, that I was a monster. I watched her drag her suitcases to her car, backing out of the driveway and disappearing into the night. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in crisis management, but this time, I was both the client and the manager. I sat the children down the next morning. Telling a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old that their mother would not be coming home for a while was the hardest thing I have ever done. I did not lie, but I did not burden them with the sordid details. I told them Mom made some mistakes that she needed to fix, and that we were going to be a team of 4 for the foreseeable future. Mia, however, required the truth. I took her for a drive and laid out the facts, omitting the sexual graphic nature of the texts, but being transparent about the financial and legal betrayal. She cried, not for her mother, but for the realization that her family was a lie. Then came the counterattack, and it was more vicious than even I had anticipated. On Monday morning, I walked into my firm to find my partners gathered in the conference room. They looked grim. Vanessa, utilizing her skills as a top-tier public relations director, had gone on the offensive. She hadn't just gone to a divorce lawyer. She had gone to the Securities and Exchange Commission as a whistleblower. She had filed a formal complaint alleging that I was the mastermind behind the insider trading scheme, claiming that I had used her and Caleb as pawns to execute trades on my behalf to avoid detection. It was a brilliant, sociopathic lie. By positioning herself as a whistleblower, she gained federal protection and froze my ability to fire her from the narrative. My partners showed me the leaked press release she was planning to drop by noon. The headline was devastating. It painted me as a controlling manipulator who exploited his wife's connections for profit. If that story went live, my firm would be toxic within the hour. Clients would flee. My license would be suspended pending investigation. I looked at the men I had built this business with and told them to hold the line. I told them I had the digital smoking gun that proved she was the architect, not the victim. But proving it in court would take months, and the court of public opinion moves in seconds. I needed to kill the story before it launched. I called Julianne. She was already ahead of me. She had found a burner phone in Caleb's gym bag that contained voice memos. Caleb, paranoid and weak, had recorded his conversations with Vanessa as an insurance policy. In those recordings, Vanessa was clearly heard orchestrating the leaks, laughing about how clueless I was, and explicitly planning how to frame me if I ever found out. It was the silver bullet I needed. I sent the audio files to the Securities and Exchange Commission investigators and, more importantly, to the legal counsel of the media outlet Vanessa was courting. The story died on the vine. But Vanessa was not done. Desperate and running out of options, she played her final, most destructive card. I was at home helping my son with his math homework when the front door burst open. It wasn't Vanessa. It was the local police, flanked by Child Protective Services. Vanessa had called in an anonymous tip claiming that I was physically endangering the children, stating that there were unsecured firearms and drugs in the house. It was a swatting attempt designed to humiliate me and get the children removed from my custody. My children were terrified. Officers swarmed the living room, hands on their holsters. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw the fear in my son's eyes, the tears streaming down my daughter's face. I calmly identified myself and directed the lead officer to the safe in my office, which contained not drugs, but the meticulously organized evidence of my wife's instability and the restraining order I had served her. I showed them the time-stamped text messages where she threatened to take the kids by force if I didn't settle. The police stood down, apologizing for the intrusion, but the damage was done. My children had seen their father treated like a criminal in their own living room. As the cruisers pulled away, I stood on the porch and looked out into the darkness. I felt a cold, dark rage settle over me, heavier and more permanent than before. Vanessa had crossed the line from unfaithful wife to existential threat. She had weaponized the police against our children to score a point in a divorce. The next morning, the FBI arrived. They were not there for me. They were there for the electronic devices Vanessa had left behind. The evidence Julianne and I provided regarding the insider trading had triggered a federal priority case. They seized the family computer, the iPads, and even the gaming consoles. I watched them carry boxes of evidence out of my front door, knowing that my neighbors were watching from behind their curtains. The illusion of the perfect suburban life was officially dead. I received a call from Vanessa's lawyer an hour later. He sounded tired. He told me that Vanessa was willing to drop the whistleblower complaint and the custody challenge if I agreed to a settlement of $5 million and kept her name out of the federal indictment. He called it a peace offering. I laughed into the phone, a dry, humorless sound. I told him there would be no peace. I told him that I was not interested in money. I was interested in total capitulation. I told him that my counteroffer was simple. She pleads guilty to the federal charges. She signs over full legal and physical custody of the children, and she leaves the state of Illinois. If she refused, I would release the audio recordings of her mocking the children to the press. I hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped firing. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared at the empty chair where Vanessa used to sit. She had tried to destroy me with lies, and I was destroying her with the truth. But as I looked at the terrified faces of my children eating their cereal in silence, I realized that in a war like this, there are no winners. There are only survivors. And I had to make sure we survived. The months leading up to the trial felt less like living and more like holding my breath underwater. My home, once a sanctuary of noise and chaotic family energy, had transformed into a fortress of solitude. The federal indictment had come down swiftly, a sledgehammer of justice that shattered whatever delusions of innocence Vanessa was still clinging to. She was charged with 18 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and theft of trade secrets. The media, naturally, descended upon us like vultures spotting a fresh carcass. The headlines were relentless, painting Vanessa not just as a cheating wife, but as the corporate black widow who had sold her husband's secrets for a chance at a high-roller lifestyle. I shielded the children as best I could, banning television and installing filters on their devices, but they felt the weight of it. They saw the news trucks parked at the end of our driveway, and the way the other parents at school looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Vanessa refused the initial plea deal. Her arrogance, the same hubris that led her to believe she could outsmart the FBI, convinced her that a jury would see her as a victim of a controlling husband. She hired a high-profile defense attorney, a man known for theatrical courtroom antics, and prepared to drag my name through the mud one last time. But she had made a critical error in her calculations. She assumed that honor existed among thieves. She assumed that Caleb Foster loved her enough to go down with the ship. She was wrong. The trial began on a freezing Tuesday in November at the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse in downtown Chicago. I sat in the back row, a silent observer to the dismantling of my wife's life. Vanessa entered the courtroom dressed in a modest, pale gray suit, her hair pulled back, wearing glasses she did not need. It was a costume designed to evoke sympathy, to portray her as a harmless suburban mother who had simply lost her way. She refused to look at me. The prosecution, a sharp, merciless woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office, wasted no time. She laid out the timeline of the affair not as a romance, but as a transaction. She displayed the bank transfers, the hotel receipts, and the logs of the stolen data. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. The prosecutor called her star witness. The double doors swung open, and Caleb Foster walked in. He was not in a suit. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The twist that Vanessa never saw coming was that Julianne and I had not just destroyed Caleb. We had cornered him. Facing 20 years in federal prison, Caleb had taken a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years, he agreed to testify against Vanessa. He agreed to name her as the architect of the scheme. I watched Vanessa's face as Caleb took the stand. The color drained from her skin until she looked like a wax figure. The man she had destroyed her family for, the man she had called her soulmate in hundreds of encrypted messages, was now sitting 20 feet away, refusing to meet her eyes, preparing to bury her. Caleb's testimony was brutal in its clarity. He described how Vanessa had approached him with the idea. He detailed how she had used my passwords while I slept. He admitted that she had pushed for more aggressive trades, even when he hesitated. He painted her as the mastermind, the Lady Macbeth urging him to wield the dagger. Vanessa's attorney tried to cross-examine him, tried to paint Caleb as a liar trying to save his own skin, but the damage was done. The jury looked at Vanessa not with sympathy, but with cold disgust. However, the final blow was yet to land. The prosecution played the audio recordings that Julianne had discovered. The courtroom fell into a pin-drop silence as Vanessa's voice filled the air. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a woman laughing. She was laughing about how easy it was to fool me. She was laughing about using the proceeds of the crime to buy a vacation home in the Cayman Islands where she planned to take the children, effectively kidnapping them from me. The sound of her own laughter echoing off the mahogany walls of the courtroom broke her. Vanessa put her head in her hands and began to sob, but this time, it was not a performance. It was the terrifying realization that her own words had become her executioner. The jury did not need long. They deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a stern-faced man in his 60s, read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge, clearly unimpressed by her defense team's attempts to blame her actions on emotional distress, revoked her bail immediately. I watched as the marshals approached the defense table. Vanessa stood up, her legs shaking so violently she had to grab the table for support. She looked back at the gallery, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto mine. For a moment, 17 years of history passed between us, the college days, the wedding, the births of our children. She mouthed a single word to me, "Please." But I had no mercy left to give. I did not smile. I did not nod. I simply watched as they placed her hands behind her back and clicked the handcuffs into place. The metallic sound seemed to echo with a finality that signaled the end of an era. As they led her away through the side door, she did not look like a corporate mastermind. She looked small, defeated, and entirely alone. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 months later, but the victory in criminal court paved the way for the final battle in family court. With a federal conviction on her record and audio evidence of her planning to abscond with the children, the custody hearing was a formality. I stood before the family court judge a week later. Vanessa appeared via video link from the detention center, wearing a beige prison uniform, her face stripped of makeup and dignity. The judge was scathing. He called her actions reprehensible and a fundamental betrayal of the parental contract. He awarded me sole legal and physical custody of Mia, Leo, and Sam. Vanessa was granted no visitation rights while incarcerated, and any future contact would be at the discretion of the court and subject to psychological evaluation. It was the total victory I had fought for, yet standing on the steps of the courthouse afterwards, clutching the court order that secured my children's future, I did not feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. I had cut the cancer out of our lives, but the surgery had left deep scars. I drove home that afternoon through the gray slush of a Chicago winter. I stopped at the school to pick up the children. When they piled into the car, arguing about who got to sit in the front seat, the normalcy of the moment almost broke me. They did not know that their mother was sitting in a federal holding cell. They did not know that she would likely be there for the next 8 to 10 years. I had to be the one to tell them. I had to be the one to explain that the woman who gave birth to them was gone, not because she died, but because she chose greed over them. That evening, I sat them down in the living room. I told them the truth, or at least a version of it they could comprehend. I told them that Mom had broken some very serious laws, and that when adults break laws, there are consequences. I told them she was going to prison. Leo, my 10-year-old, asked if she was in a cage like a bad guy in a movie. I told him it was a place where she couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Mia just stared at the floor, her teenage cynicism warring with the heartbreaking reality that her mother was a criminal. Later that night, after the children were asleep, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julianne. It was a link to a news article detailing the collapse of Caleb's firm and the seizure of his assets. Below the link, she had typed just 2 words, "It's done." I put the phone down and walked to the window looking out over the dark lawn. The war was over. The enemy was vanquished. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I had protected my firm, I had protected my assets, and most importantly, I had protected my children. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass, I saw a man who had aged 10 years and 6 months. I was the last man standing, but I was standing in the middle of a graveyard of memories. The rebuilding process would be harder than the war itself, but for the first time in half a year, I knew that the ground beneath my feet was solid. 2 years have passed since the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse closed behind my ex-wife, sealing her fate and ending the war that had consumed our lives. Time, I have learned, does not heal all wounds, but it does allow the scar tissue to form a protective layer over the raw nerves. The silence in my home is no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a battlefield after the slaughter. It is the peaceful, rhythmic silence of a household that has found its new equilibrium. We are no longer a broken family. We are a different family, forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the cold, hard truth. I made the decision to sell the estate in Lake Forest 3 months after the sentencing. That house, with its manicured lawns and echoing hallways, was a mausoleum of lies. Every room held a memory I wanted to burn. The kitchen where I found the tablet, the bedroom where I slept beside a stranger, the dining room where we played the perfect couple for dinner guests. We moved into a sprawling, historic brownstone in Lincoln Park. It is vibrant, alive, and filled with the noise of the city. It represents a clean break, a new chapter written on fresh paper. The children needed to be closer to the energy of the world, and I needed to be closer to reality. I visited Vanessa exactly once. It was 6 months into her 8-year sentence at a minimum security federal facility in West Virginia. I did not go to gloat. I did not go to seek an apology, for I knew she had none to give that would be genuine. I went because I needed to see the ghost in the daylight to confirm it could no longer haunt me. She sat behind the plexiglass partition wearing a uniform that washed out her complexion, her hair dull and graying, stripped of the expensive highlights and treatments she used to obsess over. She looked small. The arrogance that had defined her defense was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate hunger for news from the outside world. She asked about the children, her voice trembling through the phone receiver. I told her they were safe. I told her they were healthy. But I did not tell her about the triumphs she had forfeited the right to witness. I did not tell her that Mia had been accepted early decision to Stanford, or that she had written her admissions essay on the concept of resilience in the face of institutional failure. I did not tell her that Leo had won the district science fair, or that Sam had finally stopped checking the front door every evening to see if Mom was coming home. Those moments belonged to us. She had traded them for hotel rooms and insider tips. When I stood up to leave, she pressed her hand against the glass and cried. I looked at her hand, and then at my own, and realized with a profound sense of relief that I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no pity. Just the indifference one feels for a stranger in a crowd. My career has evolved as well. I stepped down as the senior managing partner of the firm. The 80-hour weeks and the constant adrenaline of managing billion-dollar crises had lost their appeal. I realized that while I was busy saving other people's empires, I had almost lost my own. I transitioned into a consulting role, taking only the cases that interested me, charging exorbitant fees that allowed me to work on my own terms. I am home for dinner every single night. I cook. It is a simple act, chopping vegetables and searing meat, but it grounds me. It is a tangible way to provide for my children that has nothing to do with bank accounts or trust funds. The recovery of my children has been the most challenging and rewarding project of my life. Mia took the hardest hit. She carried the anger like a shield for a long time, furious at her mother for the betrayal and furious at the world for witnessing it. We spent hours in therapy, both together and separately. Slowly, the anger began to transmute into wisdom. She grew up faster than she should have, but she grew up strong. She looks at people differently now, with a discernment that took me 40 years to acquire. She knows that character is defined by action, not by reputation. Leo and Sam were more resilient, as children often are. They adjusted to the new rhythm of a single-father household with surprising ease. We have our routines. Friday nights are no longer for gala dinners or work events. They are for pizza and movies. We sit on the oversized leather sectional in the media room, a tangle of limbs and blankets, and I realize that this simple, unglamorous proximity is what happiness actually looks like. It is not the flashy vacations to Aspen or the charity balls. It is the safety of knowing that the people sitting next to you will never stab you in the back. As for the others, justice continued to grind its slow, inevitable wheel. Caleb Foster was released to a halfway house after 18 months due to overcrowding and his cooperation in another financial fraud case. But his life as he knew it is over. He works stocking shelves at a warehouse store on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana. His assets were liquidated to pay restitution to Julianne's family trust. He lives in a studio apartment and takes the bus to work. I saw him once, from a distance, when I was driving through the area for a deposition. He looked broken, a man who had gambled everything on a fantasy and lost his reality. Julianne and I remained in contact, bound by the strange camaraderie of survivors. We meet for lunch once a quarter, usually at a quiet bistro near her new gallery. She has thrived. Without the dead weight of Caleb and his gambling debts, her business has expanded into international markets. She is dating a successful architect, a man who looks at her with genuine adoration. We do not talk about the night at Alinea. We do not talk about the spouses we lost. We talk about the future. We toast to clarity. There is no romance between us, only a deep, abiding respect. We were soldiers in the same trench, and we both made it out alive. I have not dated. Perhaps one day I will, but for now, my heart is full enough. I have learned that trust is a currency that is easily spent and incredibly difficult to earn back. I am content to be the father, the provider, and the protector. I am teaching my sons what it means to be a man. I teach them that a man keeps his word. I teach them that a man does not lie to the people who depend on him. I teach them that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and especially when everyone is watching. One evening, late in the summer, I sat on the roof deck of our brownstone, watching the sun dip below the Chicago skyline. The city lights were flickering on, a grid of golden ambition against the deepening indigo sky. Mia came up and sat beside me, handing me a glass of iced tea. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture she hadn't made since she was a little girl. We watched the traffic on Lakeshore Drive, the endless stream of red taillights and white headlights. She asked me if I ever missed the way things were. I thought about the question carefully. I thought about the perfect image we had projected, the country club membership, the power couple status. And then I thought about the rot that had been underneath it all, the coldness in the bed, the transactional nature of our conversations. I looked at my daughter, a young woman of fierce intelligence and unshakable moral compass. I looked at the life we had built from the ashes, a life that was smaller, perhaps, but infinitely more solid. I told her that I did not miss a single second of the lie. I told her that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most beautiful deception. I told her that we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. Vanessa chose the path of selfishness and instant gratification, and she ended up with nothing. We chose the path of painful honesty and difficult reconstruction, and we ended up with everything that matters. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from the lake. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean air. The storm had passed. The wreckage had been cleared. The foundation had been repoured, stronger and deeper than before. I was 46 years old, single, and scarred, but as I sat there with my daughter, listening to my sons laughing downstairs over a video game, I felt a profound sense of victory. I had not just won the lawsuit. I had not just won the custody battle. I had won back my life. And this time, I was going to live it with my eyes wide open.